Now, finally, someone who grew up with Elvis as a child at Graceland and who was, for the last 5 years of his life, Elvis's companion and bodyguard. So welcome, Elvis's stepbrother, David Stanley. Can I ask you, what's your reaction to impersonators like
I think it's interesting. I think he was very good, but I liked what he said when he said he leaves the stage and he's Big Jim. When he comes out and does his performance, he does an impersonation, and that's good, but to take it home with you, I think, is a little strange.
You saw Elvis at Las Vegas yourself, didn't you, Suzanna?
Yes.
I mean, obviously, we think Big Jim looks very like him. It sounds like him. I mean, was that the way he was on stage?
Well, on stage, I think, I mean, Elvis is, how can I tell you Elvis? But I mean, when Elvis went on stage in Vegas, it was a big thing. I mean, his first night, everybody was there. If you weren't on his first night, I mean, you weren't anybody. But also, when he did this kneel-down business, and when he used to raise that, when he used to raise those, that cape, and what did the Colonel used to say? It was the cheapest light show in town, because, I mean, for 15 minutes, there'd just be a barrage of lights, wasn't it? Something incredible. And, I mean, you knew you were there, not just at anybody's show. I mean, EP was really big news, man. I mean,
you call him EP?
I just called him Elvis or Boss.
Or Sir.
But several of his friends called him EP.
Yeah.
What was it? You grew up in Graceland because Elvis's father married
my mother, right?
Your mother. Now that makes you his stepbrother.
That's correct.
So you grew up in Graceland. What was it like growing up there?
It was a lot of fun. You know, the early years. I moved in '60 and I was only 4 years old. So as a kid growing up in Memphis, Tennessee, on 14 acres of land in a big, beautiful home like that, you could imagine what it was like. We did a lot of horseback riding. We raced go-karts. We snowmobiled. Elvis was just a big kid. He liked to have a lot of fun, and he had the money to do it.
Right.
And as a child growing up, I was, fortunate enough to be a part of that.
Yeah. When did you first realize, how old were you when you realized he was, in fact, Elvis Presley, the star?
I realized it when I was about 6 or 7, but it really hit home when I was 15 in Las Vegas. As she was saying, everybody who was anybody was at the first concert, and fortunately enough, I was there as a family member. Elvis came out in '69 at the International Hilton Hotel, now the Hilton Hotel. When he walked out on that stage, I was 14 years old. I'd been a part of the pop culture. The Beatles had been over. I love the Beatles and Elvis Presley. He's my brother, but come on, is he going to come out here?
It must have been really heavy that day.
Yeah, you're going to come out.
What a smart numbers to say. EP was my brother. Oh wow. I mean.
Well, I like the name drop every now and then. But anyway, he walked out on stage. I'm 14 years old, and I'm up with Led Zeppelin, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, the Beatles. Elvis comes out and just blows me away.
That's right.
Just incredible. The guy was in a class of his own. After the concert, I'm backstage, and I'm talking to him, and I said, Elvis, wow, that's incredible. He said, hey, that's why they call me the king of rock and roll.
That's right.
He says, who else can do it? And I'm going, hey, this don't get too egotistic. He said, hey, I'm the king of rock and roll. So, he can say it.
Yeah, no argument.
No, I didn't argue after that. He had his seal of approval for me for what it was worth.
Yeah. You joined his entourage when you were very young.
1972. I was 16 years old.
Now, that must have been, if we can get to something a little bit more serious, that couldn't have been good for a boy that young, could it?
It was good for me.
Well, yeah, because you had a lot of fun.
My mother was very upset. Son, please don't go. Please don't go. But Elvis could talk you into anything, right?
Absolutely.
Steady,
He's quite
Suzanna.
extraordinary.
Yeah.
I mean,
Careful.
no. Oh, no. I was absolutely quite shocked that out of all the leading men I'd ever starred opposite, or well, you didn't star with Elvis. I mean, you co-starred with Elvis. Elvis was a star, of course. But I mean, he never actually tried to pull me, chat me up. One day I said to him,
what's the matter with me?
Yeah, I mean, don't you fancy me? I mean, everybody. So he said, listen, baby. I mean, I said, I know you're being faithful to Priscilla and all that sort of thing. He said, oh no, baby. I mean, I respect you and Priscilla far too much for anything like that. I went, oh. I have to think about that one. I had to go away and think about that. I was really serious. And I read in the paper the other day that, in fact, apparently you only slept with Priscilla once. So, I mean, I was pretty cool.
But you were there throughout the good times and the bad. For a young man as part of the entourage, because there were drugs,
It got
There was
difficult.
drink.
In
Elvis
19...
was
there
one
were
of the
women.
least drug takers. I mean, in the 60s when I was there, if you don't mind me butting in, I mean, my goodness, I mean, Elvis really, I mean, no way.
Well, anyway,
But
1970...
what about in the 70s?
In 1972, Elvis was very hot. His concerts were unbelievable throughout the States.
Yeah.
But in 1974 and 75, there was a slow decline physically. And because of his grueling schedule on tour, he got involved in medication prescribed by physicians. And he would take 1 or 2 to sleep, 1 or 2 to wake up, which was fine with a grueling schedule like Presley had. But because of a physician who felt that there was money to be made, instead of pulling back, he gave him more and more and more. Use went to abuse. And again, the physician didn't take the care or the time to say, Elvis, you need to back off, you need to slow down. Instead, more and more and more. And it's been written, it's no big surprise that Elvis got involved in heavy, heavy drugs. Some 5,000 pills prescribed 6 months before he died. Now, no one needs that type of medication, but here was a doctor who saw a gold mine and took advantage of it. And Elvis, who had become somewhat addicted, justified the fact that he was taking drugs by his name being on the bottle. He would catch me. At that time, I was heavily involved in drugs. David, if you do that, you're off this hill. David, if I catch you ever do that again, I'm going to fire you. You'll never come around again. But yet, he could take it because justification was, this has been prescribed to me. Elvis was a victim of circumstance, and he had a little boy trust in doctors
Yes.
that ultimately took his life.
But he also believed that he had a very bad illness, because he told me he had a very bad illness, and that was covered by drugs. And maybe the doctors told him he had a very bad illness. I mean, I remember 10 years ago when he died, I spent 3 hours on all networks all over the thing, and I was convinced, mainly because he was convinced, that he had cancer of the colon.
That is true. That is true. Elvis was in a tremendous amount of pain at the end of his life. And his schedule, you just can't imagine. You know, like most rock and rollers go out and do a show, off a week, off 2 days, off at least a day. Elvis was out every single night, 21-day tours, off a week, another 21-day tour. And it was physically wearing him down. And there is talk and proof now that Elvis had some colon cancer and was in a great deal of pain. And yet he would never slow down, and he would continue to push on, and because he loved to make people happy.
That's right.
I loved what you said about the smile on someone's face. It couldn't have been said better. And he loved to do that to the fans. He may not be able to give something physically to him, but he gave himself.
Oh, yes.
And the
And
people,
that voice.
the voice and the smile was on the face, and that made
Do you
him
have
happy.
any recollections of Graceland's? It must have been a horrific place.
It was beautiful.
But after he died. Beautiful, certainly, but after Elvis died, it must have been like a mausoleum, like a morgue.
Well, at the funeral, when I was at the funeral, it was unbelievable to see the mass amount of people just gathered at the gates. Some 80,000 people came through the house in 2 hours because my stepfather thought it'd be good to open the gates of the Graceland mansion so the people of Memphis could view their favorite son. 80,000 people, 100 ambulance attendants on duty, dragging people from the premises because they were so grief-stricken. Mailbags stacked up 6 and 8 feet high, 14 acres of land covered by flowers from all over the world. It was the most unbelievable thing that I'd ever seen in my life. And at the funeral, when we actually came down the driveway and drove down Elvis Presley Boulevard to the temporary gravesite, hundreds of thousands of people, military people from the local guard armory there, standing at salute, policemen standing at attention. It was unbelievable.
It's still, actually, the grief still goes on. But the thing that was disappointing for fans in those great days of Elvis, I think, Jools, was that he never appeared here. He never left
He couldn't
America.
appear anywhere. How could he appear anywhere?
Well, there's Wembley Stadium. He
It
could have
wasn't
come.
big enough.
Well, yeah, I think
In
he
those
never,
days,
they rumoured that he dropped in here on a military aeroplane in Scotland once in 1961 for a few fleeting moments, but it was unpublicised, and I was only 3, so I was to get there. Also, you know, I mean, I think I don't know what you think of all of the. You see, because in some people's minds, Elvis has an image of. I think he was. I mean, he wasn't just a showbiz man. He had a bit of rock and roll roots to him as well. I mean, would you
A
say
bit,
that?
yes, yes.
I mean, because at the end he did appear to be a bit showbizy rather than Mr. Rock and Roll, didn't he? If you know what I mean.
Well, that's true, but the main reason Elvis didn't come here was because of his management. Colonel
That's
Tom
right.
Parker was a tremendous manager and did a good job, but he was an illegal alien in the States. And the simple fact is he could not get a passport. If he would have left the States, he would have been extradited. He would have been gone.
But also,
and
he would have gone one place, he'd have had to have gone everywhere, wouldn't
which would have been fine with Elvis. Many
yes,
times
but
I
I
would
mean-
sit down in Vegas and Elvis would look at management and say, let's go to
Go.
Europe.
Right.
Tom Hewlett of Concerts West said, hey, we'll pack Wimbledon out for a week.
That's
Yeah,
right.
oh,
You see, it
Done
was
it many
one.
times, yes.
And plus, there was a fear. Elvis was a very paranoid person because he was afraid. He saw people hurt by their fans.
Oh, yeah.
He saw the Beatles come to America. You take the Beatles coming to the Americans and seeing the hysteria that took place and magnify that about 5 billion times, then you'd have Elvis in Europe. The fans would have went totally insane. Madonna, last night at the airport, there were 500. With Elvis, goodness, there could have been 500,000.
That's right.
Because
I went
he was
to the
so,
Beatles
you know.
opening in Los Angeles at the Hollywood Bowl, and I had to relay every detail to Elvis, which is in my book, folks, which is coming out. I have to quickly plug. You've got to be in to win.
Have some more
But
gin.
it's, yes.
Yeah, would you like it, Glenn?
Have you got a book to plug too, have you?
Life with Elvis.
Life with
Oh,
Elvis.
no,
Are you
I
doing a
can't
book at the
back.
moment, Jools?
I might be doing a book about, yes, people that
About
I know.
us two. Right.
Elvis is dead, apparently, is he? Yes.
Elvis will never be
yes.
dead, of course, because he was never actually met hardly anybody. I was stunned at how few people, when I lived in Hollywood, that he didn't actually know who he lived next door to. People like Steve McQueen, all sorts of people. And I was stunned, and I'd say, what, you don't know Steve McQueen or whoever? And he'd say, no, baby, can you get... I said, sure, are you kidding? And I thought I was really cool. I'd be running around saying, hey, Elvis wants to meet you. And they'd go, oh, fantastic. You know, get all the gear together. And I couldn't believe that the man didn't know everybody.
Do you know what was so special about his music? Was it just his timing, that he was in the right place at the right time?
No, I think, well, at the beginning, he was the first person to take sort of black rhythm and blues and turn it into into things that would be popular amongst lots of white teenagers. And he was the very first person, really, to do that. And that's what people have been doing ever since. And then afterwards, he chose a lot of good songs. I mean, he didn't sort of choose. I mean, he did like in the Ghetto, he did Later and songs that and Suspicious Minds, which somebody's covered recently. He did choose. He was very careful with what he chose and chose to perform. And he had good songwriters. You know.
I wish that he'd maybe it was Colonel Park, but I wish he'd made
The show?
better movies. Or
You know,
that
he
he'd
was
done
never
more
really happy at the beginning. He was happy with his films, but
Yeah.
after 10 years, the repetition, the same old singing to everything from dying women to
right.
dead hound dogs. I mean,
Oh, that's
Elvis is the same old SOS.
Also, it's an
Oh,
awful
yes,
thing
but
to say.
listen, he did actually have fabulous directors, don't forget. I mean, we once talked about, I mean, I said, you're so lucky, you've actually been directed by a serious director. He said, what do you mean, babe? I said, listen, the guy who made Casablanca directed you. I mean, serious directors, aren't you lucky?
But what he needed was a serious part.
Well, I've got
He wasn't allowed to, as you know, of course, by
I've got
the
a serious director here who's telling me to wind up, so I'll just thank you all for joining
Thank
us.
you.
Nice
Thank
to see
you.
you. Thank you. That's David and Jools and Suzanna. And the pictures on the way out, that'll be in the book. Don't forget to contribute, that's all we've time for. I'm off in the Holliers for a couple of weeks. A lovely Selena Scott will be sitting in this very chair on Monday with Rudolph Nureyev and Geraldine, Queen of Albania. It'll be crowded, but pleasant. I'll be back on Bank Holiday Monday with Bette Midler, Queen of Insomnia. Have a nice weekend, nonetheless.